short introduction. I'll take it from here. Yeah, Allison's my name. Accessibility is the game. I'm a digital accessibility sensei at Intopia. Apparently consultant was too boring. And they got a bit excited when they heard that I actually do have a real live black belt in karate. I haven't used my skills in anger in the workplace, so you're all safe for the moment. I'd love to carry on the conversation, so if you want to tweet me at Raven Alley afterwards, happy to chat some more. So we're talking accessibility tonight, and in its broadest sense, we're talking about the qualities that make an experience open to all. So in our web space, in our online space, we're talking about the qualities of our websites and apps that make it possible for as many people as possible to come in, to use, to consume. I think that's a pretty, it's a broad thing. And given I've only got 20 minutes, I'm really not going to be able to deep dive. So I'm going to have to leave it there. Trust me on it. In my work, I look at 4 very broad categories when I'm discussing with clients about different abilities and different needs for people when we're looking at accessibility on the web and online and in your mobile apps. This counts for mobile as well. We're looking at vision, we're looking at hearing, we're looking at mobility, and we're looking at cognition. So hopefully you can sort of dream up some people or some skills in each of those areas that you can think of. People who are blind, partial vision, profound hearing loss, an ear infection, mobility, amputations, tremors, spasms, when you've got things that make your hands clench and you can't let go. Cognition, oh, such a broad area. Where do I start? Stroke, dyslexia, English as second language, poor reading skills, ADHD, autism spectrum. All of those conditions affect the way that people consume your information and understand your information. So within these areas, we've got permanent conditions. We've got temporary conditions like illness and injury, and we've got environmental or situational conditions as well. So my vision condition is when I go and try and use my phone in the sun. I can't see. Poor contrast websites affect me sometimes when I go out and use my phone in the sun. So when you think about accessibility, obviously front of mind is those people who need and rely on this stuff all the time. But be aware that there's a much broader audience, including yourselves, that will benefit from an accessible point of view. So a big question I get is, whose website must be accessible? Usually people with their eyes on the bottom line. Who's got to do it? Who must do it? And some people go, oh, the government. Government has to do it. They disseminate information that's relevant to everyone, and they've got to do it as being the government. Some people think it's just big business because they go, well, I remember this thing in the media, someone put in a complaint against this big business website. They couldn't use it, or they couldn't buy tickets to the Sydney Olympics, or those sort of things. But I'm here to tell you that if you're working on a website, if you're working on an app, if it's in Australia and it's for the Australian people, you've got to make your stuff accessible. So there's no ifs, no buts, no maybes, no outs, it's just for internal staff. Internal staff, I've heard that as an excuse. It's just for the internal people. That's okay. Second-class citizens. Yay. So your website has to be accessible. And who says, other than me? The law. Don't take my word for it, take the law. The Disability Discrimination Act 1992 says that all Australian websites presenting information, services and products to the Australian people have to do this thing. They have to make a reasonable effort to provide equal access. Fair enough. So the Australian Human Rights Commission, very helpful people who interpret the law for people who aren't lawyers, made up that description for me. You know, organisations have to do it, reasonable effort, et cetera, et cetera. They also define how much is reasonable effort, and that is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0. So anyone who's worked in accessibility hopefully will be familiar with these guidelines. It's a standard which has been published by the W3C, the guardians of the internet. It's also been published as an ISO standard, if ISO standards are the thing that floats your boat. 2.0 was published in 2008, so it is getting on in years and people go, oh, it's not relevant. I'm happy to inform you that 2.1 is currently being worked on and is due for publication next year. They're currently accepting input. If you'd like to go online, they've got a thing on GitHub where they're listing all of the new content for these guidelines. So the standard is, the guidelines are 61 testable, measurable success criteria that you can use as a basis of a checklist to check off against your website. I can do this thing, you can do this thing, I can see this thing, I can hear this thing, I can consume this thing. 61 testable, measurable criteria. So if you're looking at accessibility and you want to know whether your site is accessible, you need to have a look at that list. Now, I'm sorry to say that it's a standard. And if anyone's read a standards document, it's as dry as dust. And if you're looking for some bedtime reading, this'll get you going, or snoring. I thought I'll chuck one in just to illustrate the situation. I'm a content writer sometimes, so this just makes me weep. It's a 39-word sentence which basically says, make your website work with a keyboard. Unless it needs something like a stylus. Yeah, they took 39 words to get through and say, make your website work with a keyboard. One of the absolute core components of accessibility is making sure your website works with a keyboard. I can't stress it enough. So one of the important points that I will get you to look at is level A. So the guidelines, those success criteria, are split into 3 levels: A, AA, AAA. A is your core gear. Gotta do it. No negotiation. You don't do an A-level criteria, you're breaking it for someone. You are preventing someone from achieving something on your website. Either they can't read it, they can't interact with it, they can't submit your form, they don't understand what's going on, something's gone terribly, terribly, horribly, horribly wrong. Level A. 25 criteria. Check, check, check. AA. What I like to call the, you really should be doing this stuff too. 13 more criteria. And the point at which the Australian Human Rights Commission says, this is what we consider a reasonable effort. Level A, AA, you do all those things. Australian Human Rights Commission considers that you have put in a reasonable effort to make your site accessible. You haven't necessarily made, side note, you haven't necessarily made your site usable. Very important distinguish, but you've made a good effort to make it accessible. Another way that the success criteria can be chopped up rather than the levels is what the issues are that those criteria are addressing. So for the perceivable success criteria, those things are looking at, I can consume the content. It's presented to me in a way that I can see it, or I can hear it, or I can use my peripherals to read it on a Braille keyboard. I can fire up a screen reader and have it dictate the content to me. An operable success criteria is like my keyboard success criteria that I just showed you now. I'm able to interact with this website successfully. So the keyboard criteria is one. Being able to extend time limits is another important one. Some people with limited mobility or limited memory, like I'm suffering right now, you know, they need some time to go away, think about it, do some research, look up something else. The ability to extend a time limit may be the difference between someone successfully completing a task or not. So operable. Understandable, fairly self-explanatory. I can understand the content. So as well as it being perceivable and I can take it into my eyes or my ears or haptic feedback or braille keyboard or all the other ways, it's also understandable. So I can, you know, it's written in a way and the IA is presented in such a way that I understand what's going on, I know the information, and I can make informed decisions. The final one is being robust. There's only 2 success criteria here. It's really quite straightforward, and it's making sure that when someone is using or relying on a third-party technology to consume your website, whether it be the screen reader software or a braille keyboard or even a QWERTY keyboard or a magnifier, anything else, your code is written to a quality, to a standard that it won't break when those other tools try and use that code and reference that code and parse that code. So those are the 4 ways or the 4 types of success criteria within the accessibility guidelines. So these are the core tenets of what you're trying to address when you're trying to be accessible. I can consume, I can use, I can understand, and my assistive technology works. So if we're looking at some roles, and I'm not going to go into all of the success criteria because long, my time short, so we're going to move on. And I'm just going to cherry pick a couple of key things that you can take away and start applying quite easily to just raise the bar of accessibility. For the UX and graphic design space, please check your color contrast. Grey on grey, very schmick, also very unreadable. So there's heaps of color contrast tools available on the web. This is my favorite. It's from the Paciello group. You can plug in a hex code, you can put in an RGB, or you can sample with the eyedropper, and it will tell you that your text passes the AA or the AAA level criteria with the contrast ratio reported as well. This contrast thing applies to text on flat backgrounds, it applies to gradients, and it applies to text that is presented on top of images. So make sure that the text that you apply on your images, that, you know, the worst combination of your text on your image, so like yellow on white, which I may have seen one of the brands earlier, passes criteria, not naming any names. Visible focus states are important for people who rely on keyboards. I know that the dotted button outline is very 1995, and a lot of designers actually suppress the outline style. People are relying on that thing to understand where their focus point is throughout the page. People do, you know, exclusively use a keyboard to traverse a page. So please let people understand where their focus point is. And when you're defining those focus points, don't just rely on colour. There's a certain cohort of the population who are colour blind and won't notice or detect that change. So you need to do something that visually changes whenever you're moving focus around, whether it's an outline, it's an underline, your text gets big, your element gets bigger compared to the ones around it. You do it, just don't be subtle. Be big, be bold, make it a design decision, not just something you have to do. The last thing for UX, if you're responsible for personas, I'd be interested to know how many people working with personas have actually included people with different needs in their personas. Anyone who's targeting the public should at least try to incorporate some of the different abilities into their personas, because it does impact the way that they interact with your site. For the devs, there was a fair show of hands with the devs earlier. Mental note, you didn't say my role. All the digital accessibility sensei. But for the devs, native HTML, it just works. Really, that's all there is to it. When we're talking about third-party integrations with software and technology that interprets things and describes things to users, native HTML just has so much of the accessibility goodness baked in. You know, input type equals checkbox. It knows it has to be focusable. It knows it has a checked and unchecked state. It has a focus outline. It announces as a checkbox by screen readers, and it just happens. This second one is a div masquerading as a checkbox, and it's already got a bunch of extra stuff on it to make it appear to be a checkbox, and I haven't included the JavaScript, which you also need to add on to that to handle all those events, and the CSS to change the checkbox state. That one's easy, do that. And it works, and it's accessible. Manage your focus states. People who are in single page applications and using dynamic page updates, please manage your focus when your content changes, particularly if you click on buttons and the button disappears and is replaced by new content. Please explicitly set your focus to a new point on the new page so that people can then start reading and start consuming from the appropriate meaningful point. And related to the native HTML, is checking the accessibility of framework code. So frameworks are very cool. I got out of dev before the frameworks came in, but apparently they're the hit thing. Very trendy. And they do a lot of this non-native custom component stuff. Some of them do it reasonably well. Some of them do it horribly, not horribly well. So do please check about the keyboard access. Do please check about whether they've got the states and the roles and things defined. Check if they work for a variety of input devices and things like that. For the content writers, it wouldn't be an accessibility talk if I didn't talk about alt text. So here's the mention. If you've got images in your content, please define short, descriptive phrases for your devs to plug in as alt text on your images. Don't hide your images in background image CSS because screen readers don't know they're there. It's like Ninja. So yeah, use image tags, define alt text. If you're using an image that you can't describe in a Twitter phrase, so say the data points in a graph. So, you know, if you've got an image of a nice graph, it's showing a trend of a thing and you've got all the data points there and you want to describe that meaningfully to a person, you're not going to fit that in an alt tag. So please find a way to provide a text-based alternative for that content and put it somewhere near that image so that it can be consumed in context. If you can't put it with the image, at least link to it near the image so that data can be consumed by the person in the way that they prefer. Use plain language. Content writer must say, use plain language. Shorter sentences, simpler words. Use your readability checkers. Plain language. Works for everyone. Short. And define unique link text. Unique link text, if you really know your WCAG guidelines or success criteria, is actually AAA. I'm going to sneak it in because I think it's really important. Provide more context for your users. Don't use read more, click here. Or I might have to break out the karate. Actually describe what the action is that you're about to trigger or the destination that that link will take you to. Usability 101. Oh, wait, this is an accessibility 101. Bit of crossover. Anyway, time's running. I would highly suggest everyone have a go at assistive technology. You are all carrying around a screen reader on your phone right now. It is in the operating system of iOS and Android, and I don't know about the rest. Good luck. However, caveat, do not turn these things on unless you have nearby and handy instructions for turning them off. Because once you turn these things on your phone, it changes the way that your phone interprets gestures. Tapping on a thing doesn't click it anymore. Double tapping it does. So if you've jumped the gun and you've turned it on and you're stuck, never mind. Just turn down the volume because your phone will start talking out loud, and any of your notifications that come in from your mates who are texting you and stuff will be announced to the general audience. If you've turned it on, pop down the volume, maybe have a play, come and see me after, we'll sort it all out. They do. These have a lovely little test environment that you can play in. So do go and have a play, learn the gestures, figure out this is how people use their phones if they can't see them. Blind people use touchscreen phones. This is how. So, it's very illuminating. I was going to say eye-opening, but that's really wrong. Sorry, accessibility joke. Lastly, back to the devs, test your code. There's a bunch of free plugins and extensions for browsers that will help you have a look and check the success criteria that are related to parsing and content and code structure. So it'll tell you whether your headings are hierarchical and in order. It'll tell you whether you're missing your alt tags. It'll tell you whether you're duplicating IDs and attributes, which is a no-no. So these are my favorites. There's lots more. They're all free. Bonus. No excuses. Last thing. If you're not talking about accessibility already, please tomorrow at your workplace, ask the question, are we doing anything about accessibility? Do we have an accessibility plan? Do we have, has anyone ever complained? If so, what did we do about it? If not, what happens if they do? Who do we ask about accessibility stuff? So please do start the accessibility conversation at your workplace. This is relevant to everyone. Like I said, all websites, all mobile apps, this is up for you. It's all the time I've got. So that's about as far as I can go. But you want more? Very quickly, next week, Ali Bites is on. It's Global Accessibility Awareness Day next week, next Thursday. It's an evening of lightning talks. If you liked this is more. In 10-minute chunks, 10 minutes, you'll get a whole bunch of stuff. It's really cool. It's happening in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Canberra concurrently. If you've got friends interstate or you're going to be interstate, no excuses, everyone go. If you're really up for it, Ali Camp is happening in Sydney in September. It's a conference. We've got a full day workshop. We've got a full day of conference presentations, and it's awesome. You get a deep dive into accessibility, but at the same time, it doesn't assume that you're an accessibility expert. And I'm done.